People remember me as the man who drove 256 Grand Prix. When I retired, that was a record. Nobody in this sport had raced more than that before me. That is the number people remember when they hear my name. I remember a different number. 3.5 years. That is how long I spent not knowing whether I would go to prison for something I did not do. I think that maybe outside the sport I never had a fantastic image, but inside Formula One, I think I had quite a lot of respect from everybody who actually worked alongside me. I am not going to tell this story the way people usually tell it. No big build-up, no music swelling before the bad part arrives. I am simply going to tell you what happened, in the order it happened. 1978 first, then 1981, then the years that came quietly after both of those. There was one race that changed everything, one trial that followed it, and one man, James Hunt, whose words about me followed me around this sport for 20 years, whether they were true or not. It started at Monza, in September. Let me tell you exactly what happened there. The 10th of September 1978, Italian Grand Prix, Monza. Just after the start, cars were jockeying hard for position going into the first chicane. There was a multi-car collision, several cars caught up in it at once. Ronnie Peterson's Lotus was hit from behind and caught fire almost immediately. He was pulled out with leg injuries, not life-threatening, the doctor said at first. He died the next day anyway, from an embolism nobody had predicted. I was blamed for it, almost immediately, before anyone had properly looked at what happened. Monza was a racing accident triggered by Ronnie Peterson's poor start. The footage shows I was already ahead at the touch point and could not have influenced the accident at all. That is what I have always said, calmly, whenever anyone asked me directly. Here is what the television replays actually showed. TV replays suggested that it was Hunt who had caused the accident, but Hunt never accepted this, not then and not for years afterward. James Hunt's McLaren swerved and hit Peterson's car. Not mine. But Hunt was the loudest voice in that paddock, and the paddock believed him without asking many questions. A few days later, at the next race in America, Bernie Ecclestone came to find me himself. Bernie came to me, he says, "You have a big problem. The other drivers have something they want to tell you." So I went to them and spoke to Hunt, Andretti, Lauda, and Fittipaldi. Hunt said they wanted to teach me a lesson. They told me I was to be banned from the race, and if I refused to accept it, they would withdraw themselves. I did not race at Watkins Glen that year, not because any official body banned me, because 5 other drivers said plainly they would walk out if I was allowed to compete. The organizers could not risk losing half the grid, so I stayed home instead, and said nothing publicly about it. That was 1978. 3 years later, it became something far more serious than a paddock argument. It became a criminal case. 3 years later, in October 1981, I went on trial in Milan, manslaughter. Alongside me in the dock was Gianni Restelli, the man who had been racing director at Monza that day. The prosecutor asked the court for 8 months in prison. I had carried the weight of manslaughter charges for nearly 3.5 years by that point, waiting for this moment to finally arrive. James Hunt did not come to the trial himself, but his testimony was already sitting in the file, given before the hearing even began. Testimony given by Hunt in the pre-trial hearing was admitted in court and formed a major plank of the state prosecutor's case against me. His account said the collision happened because I had squeezed him over on the grid. That claim is what the whole prosecution built their case on. Here is what I told the court myself, calmly, when it was my turn to speak. When the green light came on, I got away to a good start in the 6th row. In front of me was Hunt, who seemed to have been caught by surprise, or maybe just had a bad start of his own. I sat in that courtroom and said exactly what happened. I did not raise my voice once. The evidence was quietly on my side, even if the newspapers for 3 years had never once been. The verdict came back that same night. Not guilty. Fully cleared. When it was read aloud, my mother burst into tears and ran across the courtroom to hug me before I had even stood up. An overhead photograph, taken during the crash, showed my car was already clear of both Hunt and Peterson before the impact. It had been sitting in an archive the whole time, unused. I was found innocent that night. But being found innocent, and actually being believed, turned out to be 2 very different things. The verdict came in October 1981, not guilty. On paper, that should have ended everything, once and for all. It did not end anything at all. Autosprint magazine published the text of the explanation, which was finally made public 2 full years after Milan judges cleared me of every charge. Normally, it is only a matter of weeks before the explanation is deposited in the legal archives and becomes public record for anyone to read. 2 years. That is how long it took for the court's own written reasoning to become public. Not because anyone was deliberately hiding anything from me. It simply was not treated as urgent by anyone involved. I had already been cleared, so nobody felt any rush to finish the remaining paperwork properly. In the meantime, I still had to walk into the very same paddock as the drivers who had banned me from racing. I still had to sit through press conferences with journalists who had already quietly decided years earlier exactly who I was. One of those journalists, Nigel Roebuck, wrote about this himself, honestly, many years later. For much of his career, though, I avoided him. It endured until Patrese joined Williams years later. He's talking about me there, a journalist, a supposedly neutral observer, admitting openly that he avoided me for years because of what other people had said, not because of anything he had actually witnessed himself. If a professional writer treated me that way, you can imagine what it was like with everyone else. Team bosses, sponsors, fans back home in Italy, who took the accusation personally simply because I was Italian and the crash had happened on Italian soil. Being found innocent on paper did not undo any part of that. I had to prove it again, quietly, every single season, for years. 1984, I moved to Alfa Romeo. 2 full seasons there. 8 championship points in total, across both combined. 1 single podium, at my home race in Italy. The car had a turbo engine that burned far too much fuel for what we were legally allowed to carry that year. Again and again I would be running comfortably inside the points, 2 or 3 laps from the finish, and the car would simply run dry underneath me. Not a crash, not a driving mistake, just an empty fuel tank, with the finish line already in sight. I never once criticized that team publicly. Not to journalists. Not to anyone who asked me directly why we kept running out of fuel so close to the finish. That was never how I chose to do things, even when I probably had every right to say something. But privately, underneath all of that calm, it was different. By 1985, it was beginning to affect my private life, and so I said to myself, "Hey Riccardo, you have to do something about this properly." That sentence is the closest I have ever come, in public, to admitting how close I actually was to breaking. Not because of the car, not really because of the results either. It was the years of carrying Monza around with me quietly, on top of a car that could not finish a race using its own fuel. 7 years had already passed since Peterson died. I still had not escaped that shadow. A slow car does not create a new shadow of its own. It simply makes the old one easier for everyone to see. I did not quit. I did not say anything dramatic to the press about it. I simply kept driving, kept testing, kept quietly showing up, the same way I always had. 1988, I joined Williams. I was not the number 1 driver there. I did not need to be, not anymore. You call him up, ask him to test at a moment's notice, and he says, "Fine, no problem, I'll be there." He's not a selfish man, that's the thing, which is quite rare in a racing driver. That is how the team spoke about me. Not fast above everyone else on the grid, not a champion, just someone they could trust to show up and do the job properly, every single time, without any complaint at all. By 1991, something had genuinely shifted. My teammate that season was Nigel Mansell, a driver most people in this sport considered clearly faster than me. Throughout the first half of that season, I outqualified him on every single occasion, race after race. Nobody had expected that from me at all. Not after Monza. Not after Alfa Romeo. Not after 13 years of being the man other people were never quite sure about. James Hunt never changed his position on any of it. Even when he became a television commentator himself, years after the trial, years after the acquittal had already been public record. The ban was later deemed illegal, but was followed by Hunt's lifelong crusade against me, despite my being cleared of any wrongdoing. It still rankles today. No, I will never forgive James Hunt for the stupid way he was to me. That is the only place in this whole story where I will not pretend to be fully at peace. He never gave me that. I did not need it from anyone else in the end. I never won a world championship. Not once. But I raced more Grand Prix than anyone had ever raced before me. That was never going to be a perfect ending to any of it. It was simply enough. There is a photograph on a shelf in my house in Cortina, not a racing photograph, just my family, from some ordinary summer, nobody remembers exactly which one. That is the only picture I keep out where people can actually see it. I never got an apology from James Hunt. I want to be honest about that, because I have been honest about everything else here. He kept criticizing me on television for years, long after the courts had already answered the only question that mattered. That still bothers me. I am not going to pretend otherwise just to give this a tidier finish than it deserves. But most of it did close, eventually, in ways I never expected. It closed the night my mother ran across a courtroom to hug me. It closed a little more quietly in a garage at Williams, when nobody there ever once asked if I deserved to be trusted. People will keep remembering the number. 256 races. That is fine. I think in the end that inside this sport I had quite a lot of respect from everybody. That was always enough. It still is.